Hi, Craig. Can you hear me?
Yep. I just sent a request so I can share. I think you might have to allow it.
Yes, we should be good now.
Okay. Okay. Am I sharing now?
Yes, it looks good. Thank you.
I wonder why it's not sharing on my screen, but that's okay. I haven't really used this before, so does it not show? Oh, I see. I got it. No, I just have
Yeah, it's really complicated.
to. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good. Sorry, you got a sick one.
Me too. And it's so hard to do live streaming and share screen because then you would see my live streaming if that makes sense.
It's all good. Let's see.
Good afternoon. It looks like we still have a few more folks we're waiting on.
Yes, sir. I think currently I have Director Block, yourself, Director Averill, I guess designee Director Chafee. Let's see if I got anyone else who's joined in yet. We don't have a quorum yet. Why don't we give it one more minute? I think we'll get the rest.
Craig, do you want to, or you want me to type in read stop to disable the AI?
Sure. I'm running the slide deck today because of Desiree's got some is have to work from home. So yeah, if you know how to undo that, please do.
Yep. I gotcha.
Thank you. We have Director Coffin join. Mr. Chairman, we do have a quorum. We have five, so we can go ahead and get going. I think others can join in I'll just announce them again. I think I do need to note that we are recording this, so everyone knows, aware of that. Just remind me to remind the others if a few others join. Director Farmer just joined as well, and looks like we got a couple others in. Okay.
Great. Welcome everyone to the April 29th, 2025 Clean Transit Enterprise Board meeting. Do we want to do a formal roll call, or do we feel like your announcement of who's here suffices for now?
I think we're good. I'll just announce if other people join in. So Director Farmer and Director Coffin are on the call. So
great. And I see the agenda in front of us. Is there any discussion or questions on the agenda before we proceed? Hearing none, let's move on to item number 1. Well, 2, but decision.
Sorry.
Again, everyone's had time to review the minutes from our previous meeting, the March 25th meeting. Are there any edits, comments, discussion on the March 25th meeting minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Could someone please make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Director Frommer. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. All right, minutes approved.
Okay, we do have one request for public comment. Andrew Gingrich from Mesa County. Andrew, are you able to put your camera and comments on? And we're asking you to limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Cool. Okay. I don't know what the 3-minute rule. But yeah, so I'm Andrew Gingrich. I'm the transit planner for Grand Valley Transit in Grand Junction. I also work within the Regional Transportation Planning Office, which was also the MPO for the region in Grand Junction. I wanted to let the board know that at the last board meeting, which was less than 24 hours ago, our board did approve a letter to the Clean Transit Enterprise, kind of in regards to the potential impact of SB 24230. And it is still making the rounds for signature, but because of the meeting coming up right now, I thought I would just kind of let you know that was coming, and maybe outline some of the main points of that letter, and then if possible, augment that with some other documents from the long range plan we just approved yesterday, as well as what was presented to the Transportation Commission for our greenhouse gas compliance. I'll let you read it when it finally comes to you, but essentially the letter is kind of requesting that small urban transit systems are prioritized, given their fair share of the potential funding from SB 24230, Grand Junction is Grand Valley Transit's only been around since 2020. We're a young system. We only have 11 fixed routes. We are a coverage-based system to provide basic access to people, very integrated in kind of the human services ecosystem in the community. But we are at kind of a crossroads as a community in terms of how we're going to grow in the future. And what type of system we'll have and what the objectives of our system will be. The long range plan on the MPO side is also kind of serving as the long range guidance for Grand Valley Transit. And we had that conversation where the community's feedback is that we want a balanced approach between that philosophical divide between ridership focus and coverage focus. And so we have articulated that kind of desire. And the letter also really highlights all of this really, I think, amazing work that the local governments have done to invest in multimodal transportation. Just in the last 5 years, I think each one of our membership or member governments have updated their comprehensive plans. The city of Grand Junction has passed its first ever pedestrian and bicycle plan, updated their transportation and engineering design standards that include multimodal elements for public projects as well as private development. And so it's really at this point where our transit system is maxed out with our current funding from local and federal sources. The local governments, our funding comes from an IGA that's competing with the general fund with all the other local needs. And so if we want to up the ante and do our part of the shifts that are happening in the community to creating more transportation options, this is really a real big potential for us through the oil and gas fee funding. We don't have an RTA. We're exploring if that's feasible, but we are in a different situation than a large urban with an RTA or even a rural resort area that's has an RTA or has that kind of revenue. We're also different than a rural system that's really focused on just mobility. We're kind of, small urbans are kind of that middle child kind of, no, sorry if that, didn't mean that as a bad thing, but we're just kind of like a in between kind of system where we have kind of both kinds of mandates. But there is momentum to kind of start to create this shift to a more multimodal, more compact, walkable kind of city. If I have time and I'm able to quickly share a screen, boy, will I be able to figure this out?
We typically don't have, I think we kind of had to arrange that before, but and I think we've wrapped up time-wise here, but we greatly appreciate your comments and look forward to getting the letter, and we can talk about this offline too.
Okay, sure. I'll just, the things I wanted to share was how the city has, how the region is changing in terms of its growth patterns, and a lot of the projects that have been started and anticipated that are really making the shift, and that those were really critical to us being able to meet our greenhouse gas compliance. And so this potential funding is a way for us for transit to do its part in pursuing that vision.
Thanks so much for your comments, Andrew. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And great. I know that Craig will certainly be in touch.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. My program administrator comments. So first of all, there's been a little bit of activity on the legislative front. The main thing is that there is a bill, I believe it's Senate Bill 161, is a transit reform bill. But that's been making way through, I think it passed through the Senate, and there's been some amendments in there. One is that that have been, I guess, approved. One is that they're going to, they changed the name from the system, was it the SOP, whatever we're calling that, the system optimization plan. They're now asked, they sort of changed the name in the bill, in the act, So it's now called the comprehensive operational analysis. So we got that going for us. But there was also some changes in there relating to the reporting requirements for RTD. One thing is they clarified that the requirement, because it had been for any agency that had a service population over 1 million. And they clarified that that's nonprofits are not captured under that provision. So it's really just focused on RTD. And then secondly, it clarified that RTD needs to, in order to be eligible for FY26, they need to bring, basically give us a plan for how they're going to comply with those specific reporting requirements, and then complete their plan and comply with the requirements by, I believe, July 2026. So a few things we'd worked with the governor's office on getting some of those changes to help clarify some things. Second issue, I think that's the only major legislative impact thing that's affecting us. One quick point is that Director Liu is on maternity leave now, and Sally Chafee is acting on our behalf as the board designee. So Director Chafee, welcome to the board.
Thank you.
So this last week we did a series of 5 virtual town halls. Some of the board of directors participated in those, appreciated it. Director Brackey was on all 5, so really appreciate the support from the board. We talked to probably 20 or so different transit agencies, and then there were a lot of other people that kind of dialed in as well. I'd say the main things that came out of those town halls, one is just some timing concerns. Actually, I wasn't really aware of this, but a lot of the agencies will likely need to go to their board or commission to get approval before they can submit an application. So we need to consider that in our NOFA process. I think it also puts some pressure for us to get the NOFA out there as quickly as possible. Also, most of the transit agencies operate on a calendar year and are starting they tend to start their budget process in June or July. So again, the sooner we can get information out to these agencies so that they can start putting numbers into their budget, the more helpful. Quite a bit of discussion about the matching requirements. Generally agencies support them, but some of the rural or smaller agencies worry about coming up with a match. So we heard from several that they'd appreciate if there was some sort of waiver or relief or sliding scale, so that if agencies really don't have the capacity to come up with the funding, they can still benefit from the program. We talked a bit about the planning that's going to be required. I guess maybe I was a little surprised, but some agencies, particularly some of the smaller or newer agencies, said they thought it would take them 6 to 9 months to really come up with a plan for what they're going to do with the money. And that they need help. So I think we need to think about that in our approach. Like how do we enable those agencies to do the planning and still build it into sort of our NOFA process? And secondly, it's clear that a lot of agencies could use some help. So I'm looking into developing a consulting contract that would provide agencies 5 to 10 hours of a transit planning consultant to assist them with developing their plans. Let's see, that was probably the main things that came out of it. Generally, I think people are just very excited about it. They're looking forward to the NOFA coming out. I'm doing a workshop at the CASTA conference next Friday, where I hope to be able to give them a little bit more guidance on what's going to be in the NOFA and what they need to do to respond to it. I've also been pretty involved in the joint service effort. I'll give a little bit of I got a slide on that later today, but there's that whole initiative is moving, and the joint service in the governor's office is looking for the CTE board along with the CTIO board and RTD to sign an IGA and also provide some commitments on funding that will provide. So we're going to be dealing with that quite a bit the next month or two. And then I just put up the CTE accountability dashboard. It's been updated on the website. As you'll see, our total amount of awards have now grown up to $15.5 million. We've got 4 projects that are now under contract and moving forward, and we're making pretty good progress getting the rest of the grants awarded and under contract. With that, I think I'm back to you, Director Jones.
Thanks so much, Craig. Now we're at the board member comments section of the agenda. If there are any new business or old business items that any other directors wish to bring up at this time, I see Director Bracke's hand.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to make some comments, and I appreciate being able to follow Craig's comments. I was so grateful to have had the opportunity to listen in to the town hall meetings last week. I just thought they were fantastic. I thought Craig and Barrick, the consultant, did such an excellent job hosting all of the meetings to make sure that local agency staff from across the state had the opportunity to provide input, to learn more about the CTE program and the goals. And it was just really incredible opportunity for that two-way dialogue and that engagement. So not only to share more information about CTE and the program that we're working on at the board and the staff is working on, but really to hear from what I would call our customers, the local agencies that are delivering transit across the state. And they provided very helpful suggestions on what would work for them, where are those areas, as Craig mentioned, they need more technical assistance, so that everyone together, CTE and the local transit providers, can all be successful in achieving the goals and the mission of the CTE program. So I just thought they were tremendous. I appreciate Craig's willingness to do the follow-up, to present at CASTA, to go out and work one-on-one with the different entities, because as he said, everyone's kind of in a different place. There's large agencies, small, urban, rural, and Craig's approach was really tremendous. And I shared this with him the other day, but he really has an approach of the spirit of yes. How do we find solutions together? What do the locals need? What does CTE need? And how do we get there together? And to have that solution-oriented approach is so refreshing and so helpful. And I think it was just an excellent opportunity for everyone to learn about CTE and for all of us to learn about what the needs are across the state. And as I said, at the end of the day, if we're all successful together, we're really going to be able to achieve the goals in the legislation to increase transit ridership and achieve our GHG emission goals, our air quality goals. So I just want to thank Craig and the consultant team for hosting those, and say thank you to all the staff from each of the transit agencies that participated. I also think it's great that the meetings were recorded, so if people weren't able to attend, they can listen in. And again, that follow-up that Craig's willing to do is just tremendous. So I was very impressed and very thankful for all the work that's being done and that spirit of engagement across the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Bracke, and thanks for the kudos to Craig. Also, and thank you for attending all of those meetings, because that was no small feat for staff and also for you to take the time to attend all. It's very much appreciated. Any other comments from directors? Hearing none, I will move forward into the financial update.
Okay, and we've got Kay Huska and Sam Foster, I believe, are presenting. Go on to the next slide here. Is this Sam? I'm not sure.
Hi, Craig. It's me, Tony Wines. I'm actually filling in for Kay Herska today. Just wanted to give you an update on the budget to actual. For the clean transit retail delivery fee, the revenue received for this fiscal year, total amount is $8.2 million. The interest revenue is $545,000. Majority of the expenses so far are in the staff salaries at $97,000. And for the attorney general fees, we only have $2,600 in expenses. The total expenses so far for FY25 is $100,000. Is there any questions that I could have from the board today?
Tony, I just want to highlight, because we're kind of getting, we said it's a little bit new having the multiple versions, but this is the portion of the CTE that's built around the retail delivery fee. There's also the portion that's on the oil and gas fund. So if people are confused why we're showing multiple budgets, is because we've got different accounts.
Yes. So on the TC loan is the Fund 541 that you were speaking of, and that is handled on the separate budget to actual. Yes.
That one. Tony, you want to go ahead and walk through the loan account?
Absolutely. So on the TC loan account, as you know, that is for the oil and gas. The loan amount is for the $600,000. Right now, the staff salary is the only expenses to date, and that is only for $1,184.
And I would note that that's been a little low, because as we've been figuring out how to charge things, like I'm now going to start charging more of my time to the transportation loan account, which is really the SB 230 stuff. Also, we haven't gotten invoices yet, but we've got 2 consulting contracts. One was the support for the public engagement, and the other is the support for developing the formula. So we're going to start seeing the costs coming in as invoices. I think I'll have a total of just under 100,000, or is it that much? Yeah, I think it'll be about $100,000. So we may need to make some change on the budget to accommodate that, just so we're numbers are lining up. And then also with the board meeting next month, being in person, we'll have some costs associated with there. I also expect to be doing some traveling to transit agencies. So I said, expect in the next month or two, we'll start seeing bigger expenses on this budget.
Yep. Thank you.
This is Stan. I
Yep.
believe.
There he goes.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Sam Foster in the Office of Financial Management and Budget, and I've got our usual revenue and fund balance, a couple update slides. And on the left, the revenue forecasts. Now we're in the Q3 forecasts. Those have stayed the same, so no updates on the left there. But in the chart, we've got our March amount, and it came in just over $1 million for the retail delivery fee. We can go to the fund balance slide. Then the fund balance update. Year-ending cash balance 19.4, and then as of last week, we're up to 28.3 million. So still well over the spending authority of 18.1. And there's no legislative update slide this time around, so just got these couple, and I'll throw it back to Chris.
Thank you so much, Sam and Tony, for those updates. Any questions from directors on the financials? With that, we can go over to Michael King for the capital grant approach.
Sure. I just want to do a quick intro on this. And so this is going to be a decent length of section of today's agenda. Like I said, we're kind of taking maybe a little bit of a break from all the focus on SB 230. But with the new capital grant round, we're going to NOFA going out in the fall. We just wanted to spend some time to talk about, how things have gone on the first round and things that we might want to consider for going, what we do in the next round. So Michael's going to lead this section and see what we can come up with. Michael, are you there?
Yes, thanks, Craig. Good afternoon to the directors. As Craig said, yeah, this is potentially a longer topic today, and I also want to state up front that we expect this to be one of multiple conversations with the board between now and the release of the next capital NOFO. So any questions or topics that we don't cover today, we'd be really happy to record those and continue the conversation at future board meetings. So just a little bit of background on the CTE capital programs. I think the board is pretty familiar with the capabilities of the CTE in terms of issuing grants, loans, and rebates to support its business purpose and its mission of facilitating transit fleet electrification across Colorado. We have 4 eligible project categories that are defined by the statute, and those are planning, vehicles, charging or fueling infrastructure, and facility modifications. We just wrapped up our most recent round of planning, and then we call the other 3 the capital categories: vehicles, infrastructure, and facilities. To date, the CTE has only really engaged in grant making. We have not talked about issuing loans or establishing rebate programs. That is an area that if the board would like to discuss in the future, we'd be happy to delve into. But for today, we're going to maintain that focus on the grant side of things because that's what we know and that's what we've been doing so far. And the CTE completed its first round of capital grants awards in the fall of 2024. I guess we actually, if I remember, we actually made the awards, I think in August, September. So most of the work was over the summer. And we'll have a brief update on the status of all those on a future slide. Next, please. So in that 2024 capital round, we received about $28 million, 28.6 worth of funding requests across the 3 categories. 2 were for facility modifications, 3 were for charging and fueling infrastructure, and 12 were for vehicle purchases. There was an application review and scoring process managed by staff, which included representatives from other state agencies and other stakeholder groups. And the final recommendations that staff made to the board and which the board subsequently approved, you can see there. We had 1 facility project for a total of $1.5 million, 1 charging infrastructure project for about $384,000, and then the remainder were vehicle projects supporting a total of 28 vehicles for $13 million. And all of these projects are now in the contracting process. Some of them have actually been executed. And if we go to the next slide, we can look at that status. So I believe we have Shilpa Kulkarni is on the call. I don't know if Shilpa wants to join in and talk to this, or I can go through it. Shilpa?
Sure. Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So as Michael summarized the total awards, we have 11 awards, and out of 11, we have Co-Trans System. We made the awards, and there are a couple of projects which are at the risk assessment and milestone stage. And we able to budget 10 projects. 1 is pending because there is 1 agency who is reconsidering their award scope. And based on that, we will move ahead. And we able to submit 5 shopping cart, and we have more updates. So almost all the vehicle awards are in the shopping cart stage, and 1 contract is executed, and 2 are in line to execute soon in this week. And the second chart is showing the settlement award, which is having some project complementing each other, and those are 6 awards, and out of those 2 are charging, 3 are charging infrastructure, and rest of them are capital vehicle acquisition project. And as you see, the 1 have a matching to each other is executed. So there's 1 award which has city and settlement award is executed, and rest of them are about to get executed very soon. That's it.
Shilpa, I see a question from Craig. Yeah, please.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to do a shout out. We learned last month that one of the grantees, RAFTA, was under some time constraints, that basically they would lose pricing on some buses if they couldn't get them done by the end of April. So Shilpa and the grant staff made it a priority, and I know that, we basically, the contract is sitting in RAFTA's inbox, metaphorical inbox, I guess now. So I was very happy and appreciative that the team was able to rally and push that through so that we could, I think, just, help our customers as much as we could. So good job.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks to Shilpa for that update. So that's a summary of the previous round of CTE capital grants, and we wanted to share that as some context before discussing our plans for the next round, the fall 2025 capital round. At this point, staff is recommending that we work towards a goal of releasing that call for projects in September. If we adopt that timeline based on our previous review timelines for other grant programs, this would result in award decisions being announced in early 2026. We have to open the call for projects. We give the applicants a certain amount of time to apply, then we review, provide recommendations to the board, and then final board approval. So a September 2025 release would put us in early 26 for the announcement of awards. At the moment, it's estimated that by the time we release that notice of funding opportunity, we would have about $12.7 million in program funds that we could award based on our current rate of monthly revenue that's coming in through the retail delivery fee. So one question to put to the board today or for future consideration is whether or not you would like us to make all available funds on that NOFO, or hold some of those funds, excuse me, in reserve for future rounds of funding. So that's one decision point that the board might consider. Is it better to spend everything that is available at the time of the NOFO or hold back some funding for future purposes? I can pause here if people have any, if the board has any feedback on that question at the moment, or it might be something to return to later in the conversation.
Thanks, Michael. Any clarifying questions or discussion from directors? Director Frommer.
Yeah, I guess a clarifying question. You're asking Mike whether we should make the full 12.7 million available later this year. Is that right? Or are we talking a larger amount? Because we do have what 28 million in the bank with the spending authority less than that, but there's more money available for multiple things. But yeah.
Yes, so the question is, I guess, a little bit more general because the 12.7 is an estimate, but I guess the philosophical point is, does the board prefer that at the time of a capital NOFO, we make as much funding as we have on hand available, or do we want to consciously hold back funds in each program round for reserves, I suppose would be the word. So yes, whether that 12.7 ends up being the exact dollar amount, does the board have a kind of strategic approach on make it all available at once or parcel it out over time, I guess?
Any other questions, discussion? I see Director Bracke's hand.
Thank you, and I appreciate you asking the question. I guess my initial reaction is it seems like we should get the money out the door and put the money to work in terms of getting results. But I guess I'd like more information to know what would the advantage be to holding some back. That's the part I'm not really understanding. My inclination, like I said, is let's get this money out there and get it making a difference, but I might be missing something. So if you could explain what the flip side of that would be, it would be helpful to make that decision, or at least weigh in on it.
I suppose the argument for holding some funding back is that we don't know on a given month what the retail delivery fee is going to produce. And so if in the future the revenues decreased, the board might feel that there were not enough funds in future rounds to be worth releasing. But likewise, the amount of the retail delivery fee could increase or could remain the same. So it's I don't think there's necessarily a strong point in either direction on that.
Director Averill.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I'm with Director Brackey on this one. My inclination at the gut level is to get the money out the door, absent some strategic reason to hold any of it back. Since these are capital projects, they're typically one-off type of things. They're not operations projects. I can't see us coming up short in the future. It's just a question of, what's going to be available. I think what we've seen, at least in the last few rounds, maybe there's not demand enough to spend all that money, and then we just roll it over anyway. So I'd be inclined to just, if we've got it and we have the spending authority, let's to Kathleen's point, let's get it out the door and try to get some results for the program.
Michael, we could make this decision during the awards point, right? If the NOFO could announce 12.7 million, we see what kind of grant applications come out of the woodwork. Could we make a decision at that time, if depending on the quality applications, or even if we get enough applications to get to that amount, could we elect to hold some funding back for future years at that time?
I believe so, but I might defer to others on the staff side as to how much flexibility the board has post NOFO. I think typically we identify a maximum amount of award for a NOFO, but the board retains the ability to award less. I don't know that you could necessarily go in the other direction if, there were more solid, more quality projects that you wanted to award. Could you increase that after the fact? This might be an area that either if somebody wants to weigh in now at the staff level, I'd be happy to accept that help. If not, we can look into that question and come back at a future meeting with a more refined strategy on that point.
Hearing no additional from staff or Craig, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we probably do. I mean, I'll do some research and find out, but Kay probably has the right answer, but I can't imagine that we couldn't actually add more money in if it's available, if we think the projects are there. But I'll confirm. But I see Kay's got her hand up. She might know the direct answer.
Yeah, and I think I just wanted to remind the board that for the retail delivery fee, the board asked us to hold 10% back as a contingency. So to the extent that we need to have an additional contingency on capital beyond what the 10% overall collected, I think is probably debatable. But I think that's what the contingency is there for, right? Like if we held a little bit back so that if prices increase, we have the ability to make awards whole after we've picked them. But I think we probably could also look at that contingency, or the board could make the decision to look at the contingency and say, we had additional good applications and we could use our contingency toward that purpose.
Great, thanks for that clarification. So this is 12.7 million after the 10% contingency has already been set aside. So what I've heard so far from directors is we want to advertise the total amount available in the NOFO. Is there any director that disagrees with that approach? Hearing none, you might have a good direction for that question.
Thank you for that guidance, directors. If we go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight a few potential policy adjustments that would be different from the previous round of CTE capital grants. And these original policy directions were set in the 10-year plan and in the run-up to the previous capital NOFO. So one example of this is that in 2024, our first round of projects, the awards were based around the incremental cost of zero emission vehicles when compared to a conventional vehicle equivalent. So essentially the formula is the cost of the new zero emission vehicle minus the total cost of an equivalent ICE vehicle gives you your incremental cost, the difference. And then the grant is designed to 100% meet that difference. So it's not paying for the entirety of the vehicle, but rather the entirety of the cost difference. This is a similar approach that the Volkswagen Settlement Program and other past grants have used. And so part of the reason that it was adopted was for consistency, but there was also a thought that funding essentially part of each project would encourage transit agencies to pursue outside funding to make up the difference. For example, pursuing federal grants, increasing their local match, etc. And that this would stretch the CTE's limited grant funds further, fund more projects, and have an overall beneficial effect. Generally speaking, at the moment, the incremental cost comes to around 50% of the total vehicle cost. So, we're essentially funding half of a bus in each award, and then the agency has to find that other half from another funding source. One of the issues that we have seen, or that we're anticipating, is that as the federal government takes a less enthusiastic approach towards zero-emission buses, that it might be more difficult for agencies to find that remaining funding, either pursuing a federal grant or finding their own funding internally. And even in a best case scenario where they are able to do that, it is still extra work, extra challenge for the transit agency to essentially find 2 grants per vehicle or to increase their funding level. So one thing that the board might want to consider or discuss in this coming round is, would we switch to a more traditional grant award level of 80% of total vehicle cost? This is more typical of what the Division of Transit and Rail does for any other type of project. And in this way, it would be more standardized that applicants are expected to provide 20% match. The CTE would award grants at an 80% of the total cost, and there would not need to be a second or third grant application by the agency to make a project whole. The potential downside of this, of course, is that we would be funding more dollars per bus, and therefore we would likely see fewer awarded projects in a given round. But it would hopefully simplify the process for applicants and might also lead to projects being implemented more quickly because they are not waiting on a secondary funding source before proceeding. I hope I explained that clearly. I will pause here and see if the board has any questions or thoughts on this topic.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, and I see Director Chaffee's.
Yeah, Chafee. Hey, Mike, what is the average cost of a bus? I mean, I know it varies, but.
Yeah, we're seeing the zero-emission transit buses anywhere from $1.2 to $1.4 million a piece at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Director Brecky.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate you asking this question, and I understand kind of both sides of it. I guess where I'm leaning is that I feel like it would be helpful to go to more of that traditional approach with the 80-20, given, like you said, the context that's changed so much. And I'm also wondering, though, if there could be a way to incentivize local overmatch. So you'd have 20% match as the norm. But if agencies were able to bring more money to the table, could the point system somehow incentivize that overmatch, but not expect them to raise 50% of the money from other sources? Have it be more voluntary and incentivized? Would something like that be possible?
We could certainly adjust the scoring criteria to incentivize higher match levels. We would perhaps want to consider the equity implications of that if some agencies are able to increase their match and others are not. But I think there is a way that we could work with the board on the scoring to achieve both of those goals.
Director Block.
As one of the rural areas, I can tell you that 50% match right now would be next to impossible. I'm hearing from several of even the larger Pueblos specifically, that 50% is getting tough, especially with the federal funding pullback. I think if agencies are able to overmatch, I think they should receive the extra points. But I think if they can't, they shouldn't be penalized for not being able to overmatch.
Thanks, Director Coffin.
Thanks, Mike, for your presentation and questions. My gut reaction is yes to offer 80%, but question, could we phrase it as like up to 80%? And could we leave the flexibility maybe to fund under 80% depending on the applications we receive?
I think that's a good suggestion. I think in practice, all grants are always up to the percentage, but yes, either with the opportunity to overmatch, or if the board is in a position where there are more projects that you would like to fund than funding available, you can do partial awards. So I think that we could phrase it in that manner to give some more flexibility.
Thanks.
Craig, did you want to add something?
Yeah, others probably know this and I don't, but if the match, like the ice cost, the original ice cost, is that considered the match, or is the match associated with the incremental benefit that we're providing? So if, the bus is $1 million total, are we doing a $500,000 grant, or is it 80% or 50% of that 500,000?
Currently, it is 100% of the incremental cost. So
okay.
If that price difference is $500,000, the grant can be up to $500,000, and whether they make up the remainder, it's effectively a 50% match, or they can go get a federal grant, in which case the math gets a little more complicated because that federal grant is probably itself 80-20. So then you might have them paying essentially, 10% match when you factor it all together. But this approach of going to a straight 80-20 at the CTE level would probably simplify that, at least from a mathematical standpoint, for the applicants, because it would just be a pretty standard expectation to what they currently see in DTR grant programs.
Thanks. Director Farmer, did you have something you wanted to ask or say?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm just remembering the last round. I just want to make sure I'm remembering it correctly, which was, I think we were oversubscribed 2-to-1 in terms of the vehicle replacement program, meaning there's a lot of unmet demand. And it sounds like the expectation here is that because things have changed at the federal level, we won't see that level of demand in the next round. Like, there's essentially just won't be enough applications for the 12.7 million or whatever that number ends up being. Is that right?
I don't know if I'm assuming that there will be lesser demand. I think what we are anticipating is that there will be fewer outside resources available for agencies to mix and match with CTE funding. So the federal level, we are anticipating some pullback. We also have awarded our last Volkswagen settlement funds last year. So in the previous round, some of our grantees applied for a CTE fund, and they also applied for a Volkswagen grant, and together made a project whole, but there won't be Volkswagen settlement funding again. So it's less that there will be decreased demand. I think there will be decreased support.
Okay. Yeah, and I just also want to keep in mind, we did set some goals around zero emission transit vehicle electrification. I think it was 1,000 vehicles by 2030. So at this clip, I mean, we got to pick up the pace to get there. So I just want to balance that with also trying to get electric buses on the roads.
Craig, something you wanted to add?
Yeah, thanks, Director Jones. One thing we don't necessarily have to get into now, but we're going to need to consider down the road, is whether agencies could use their SB 230 formula allocation as that match. It definitely came out in the town halls that people were conflating the two programs. So I was trying to make it clear to folks that no, the retail delivery fee is focused on EVs. The SB 230 program is more focused on, just trying to expand ridership and greenhouse gas reduction. That said, we might well want to be able to tell agencies like, yeah, if you need money to go deal with the 50% or 20% share of a EV bus, yeah, you can use your formula fund. So just wanted to throw that out there that we'll need to think if we want to do that or not.
Great. Director Averill?
Thank you. I just, Director Frommer brought up a couple really great points, I think, as far as like how we were overprescribed the last time around. And then the larger goal of 1,000 electric buses by, I think, 2030, 2035, if I remember. I was thinking about that just yesterday. Maybe we could, I guess, to be honest, I've never been a fan of the incremental cost approach either. I've always been kind of an 80-20 match guy, just historically. But I wonder if we, given the uncertainty around federal programs, in particular the low and no emissions bus program, I think that's really the one that's given us the most consternation here. Maybe we do this 80-20 sort of as a stopgap measure in a shorter term, but we reserve the right to revisit this topic in future rounds of funding. Now, I know it'd be super difficult to go back to a higher level of match, probably with that's a tough conversation to have with transit agencies. But I think if we state our intention to say, hey, we're doing this right now because, as Michael so eloquently put it, these other sources are a lot less predictable and reliable right now, but we want to keep the ball moving. Maybe that's threading the needle too much on something like this, but just I'd throw that out there for you guys to consider, and as well as staff. Are we going down this path permanently at 80-20 match, or do we actually have a way to could we work it out where we sort of draw back at some point when Lono doesn't go away, but it's funded, in future years? Just some thoughts.
Thanks. Maybe to summarize, what I've heard overall is a desire for flexibility, understanding, and appreciation. Appreciating the pullback in federal funding, knowing that it's not going to no federal funding, it's just going to be harder to come by, perhaps. So we want to be open to applications that are at the 80-20 level, but also write in some sort of incentive for folks who are able to secure other sources of funding, so we can spread the money as far as possible for as many vehicles as possible, is maybe how I would summarize what I've heard and represents my sentiment. Is there anybody who, any of the directors that disagree with that feedback on this question? Hearing none, Michael, Craig, does that help out and help us move forward?
Yes, that's definitely gives us something to develop a more fleshed out proposal for the board to review and approve ahead of the capital round. Another policy question to bring to the board's attention is related to how narrowly we want to define project eligibility. When it comes to vehicle purchases, I believe it's pretty straightforward. I haven't seen a lot of ambiguity in those definitions. However, the language in statute that refers to the eligibility of facility modifications and charging fueling infrastructure is very general. That is basically all that it says in the original legislation. And so in the first round of capital projects, we were able to interpret those eligibilities quite broadly. For example, the facility modification project that the board awarded included elements that are related to transit operations, but are maybe not what people initially think of as a facility. It included things like microgrids, solar panels, other elements that you could be interpreted by some as, that's not part of the transit project. And likewise, charging and fueling infrastructure, there's everything from the equipment itself, the installation, trenching, transformers. There's a lot of different elements of a charging project, and where you draw that specific eligibility line varies by state funding program. So this broad eligibility can be helpful for both applicants and for program administrators where a project doesn't neatly fit into one bucket or in another, and you can interpret that, yes, this is broadly speaking eligible or not. But on the other side of things, you could look at that and say that broad eligibility decreases the focus of the grant programs. It takes us away from the core business purpose of the enterprise. And since these terms are not narrowly defined in statute, it is up to the board, I think, to provide guidance on how narrowly you want to interpret them for the purposes of the future NOFO. So I'll put the question to the directors. Would you like to maintain this generally broad interpretation of facility and infrastructure eligibility that we've used in the past? Would you like a much more literally and narrowly defined set of eligible project elements that we share with you in advance and that are communicated to applicants so that we don't get anything that might stray a little bit outside the bounds of what we would consider a transit project?
Any clarifying questions or discussion from directors?
I have a couple questions. Did we have a project that got, I guess, into a gray area that you were uncomfortable with, Michael? I guess you don't have to name names, but yes or no on that. And then what does LONO say about this? How do they define project elements? Is that something we could draw from the LONO program guidance? Thanks.
Thank you. To answer your first question, no, there was nothing that I felt uncomfortable with. But I do see that, for instance, the elements of a microgrid could be interpreted as not technically a facility in the traditional transit sense of a bus barn or something. But no, I don't have any concerns. And personally, I think that having that flexibility is helpful at a program level, and the board ultimately, of course, retains the authority to award or not award any project based on their feelings. In terms of LONO, that's a good question. I don't actually know how specifically they define what is eligible and ineligible, but that is a good follow-up topic for me to research and bring back to the board if there's any guide there that we could adopt.
Any other questions or discussion? So it seems to me that if the burden of the grant applications in this previous round, if we were getting 1,000 applications in and they were all across the board and staff was spending a lot of time trying to whittle down into a recommended fundable set, then we want to be seeking ways to narrow criteria. But if it doesn't sound like that's the space or even close to the space that we're in, that narrowing isn't going to necessarily, help us with administrative burden. And we still have opportunity to say, actually, I appreciate this application, but it doesn't quite fit the direction that we want to go. So it seems like from my perspective, and if anybody disagrees, please chime in, that we should just keep it broad for now and revisit this if it gets to a place where we're just getting applications that are way out of the realm and not at all headed in the direction that we think we want to be headed.
Okay. Thank you. One future topic that I don't think we are prepared to discuss in detail today, but that we have had requests in the past and we plan to return to the board and discuss before the next NOFO, is the question of scrapping policies. As a quick refresher, in 2024, the CTE vehicle grants did not require or incentivize scrapping, i.e. the destruction of existing ICE vehicles as a component or requirement of the grant program. Some grant programs in other states and past ones in Colorado have required that. And so it was a question as to whether or not the CTE wanted to follow that that pattern or not require it. Ultimately, we decided not to. Some members of the board have requested a closer analysis of the specific costs and benefits of scrapping. You know, can we quantify when and how scrapping produces an emissions benefit versus does not, or actually somehow produces more emissions through lack of transit service or some other means? So we have worked some of these questions into a scope for a separate project that has just kicked off, which is our 2025 Colorado Transit Zero Emission Vehicle Roadmap, an update to the previous 2021 version. And so we will be working with our consultant team to do a literature review and try to find, are there established principles or research on this topic that can inform the board on their decision making about whether or not scrapping should be required, incentivized, or not included at all in future programs. So we expect to have some more research and data on that in the summer, and then that will give us enough time to let the board make a recommendation, make a decision, and then we can work that into the next NOFO. So not a lot to report yet on that, but we should have something for you soon. And we already touched on another potential topic, which I've written down and plan to bring back, which is the scoring criteria that were previously used, how they were weighted, and whether the board would like us to adjust any of those weights or scoring metrics based on the other policy changes that we discussed today. So that's another one for a future meeting. And I think if we go to the next slide.
That's your last one.
Yes, that wraps it up for me. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, or if the board has additional topics that we did not talk about, but that you would like us to bring to a future board meeting for discussion, please share them now, or let Craig or myself know after the meeting. And then we can make sure to follow up on these topics between now and September.
Thanks, Michael. Matt, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to hear that you're doing some initial analysis around the emission benefits of scrappage. I guess we had talked about in the past also kind of quantifying greenhouse gas reductions from replacing diesel buses with zero emission and having a more available and public facing information around that. I'm just reminded of a bill that's been working its way through the legislature now, Senate Bill 161, which requires RTD to develop performance measures around climate that align with like state and regional goals, and wanting electrification to be a big part of that effort. But I don't necessarily know if they have formulas or calculators to actually quantify the greenhouse gas reduction. So I guess if we're going to pursue that level of analysis on the scrapping side of things, it could be nice to just do a more comprehensive look at the climate benefits of our program.
Thank you for raising that. That is an area that I can look into with our CDOT colleagues who are doing similar work for the GHG rule, and bring back more information to the group at a future meeting.
Oh,
All right.
Yeah.
Back to you, Craig.
I think Director Kaufman had his hand up.
No, sorry, Director Kaufman.
Yeah, thanks. And just to maybe quickly respond or add after Director Frommer's comment, we had done some looking into the scrapping topic over here and identified maybe one or two tools that are available to look at that. And Mike, I could follow up with you maybe offline to share what we found. There wasn't much like in the literature review that we identified, but we could have missed some things. But we did find maybe some research that was done in the last maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years that looked at like transit bus scrappage and life cycle assessments in different regions, including in Colorado. And they did find that EVs had basically you know, less of a footprint than diesel buses overall when you're looking at the whole life cycle. So I can follow up with you offline about that.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. I'd be happy to look at that. Thank you.
Yep.
And I would add that what we're doing, like lit review in this study, is could be a first shot at it, and yeah, it may end up, the finding is that there isn't really much out there. And if that's the case, I don't know, it strikes me as maybe like a pretty good like graduate capstone project that we could do it with a university or someone's PhD dissertation or something like that. But again, maybe we do down the road decide to fund some independent research if we find that the current body of knowledge isn't there to support our decision making. Okay, Director Jones, can I keep going here? We got about 20 minutes and I got a few things I want to try and get through.
Yes, please do.
Okay, well, I said we'd get a small break from 2:30, but we're on not a complete break. I don't think it'll be a great day when we don't have to talk about this standing up these programs on the board meeting. Anyhow, just one slide here. I want to talk about the passenger rail program. So I think you all know there's 3 programs under the SB 230, and one of them is the passenger rail program. That's 20% of the fees go into that. And so we're expecting an FY26 with a reduced funding. It'll be in the $10 or $11 million range. And then when we get it in 27 and beyond, it's $20 to $25 million a year. The legislation is pretty broad. It essentially says the money's to help passenger rail projects around the state that are regional statewide importance. It provides some direct language about completing fast tracks. And I think essentially says is any grants that we provide for a fast tracks related project, we need to make sure that that money is in addition to what's in the accounts already in the fast tracks account, not replacing it. And then again, we're supposed to give high priority to projects that have a matching source. Like I said, the joint service is really being led or driven by the governor's office. They very much want to get to the point where they can work with BNSF to negotiate arrangements on the joint service or using their rail. And the 2 things that they really want us to do wants the board to provide is to sign an IGA and then make some level of funding commitment. And particularly, they essentially want us to commit about half of the funding to the joint service project. And they're on a pretty tight timeline. So just wanted to get this on people's radar. I've got a briefing scheduled on Monday for board members. It'll be with the head or the manager of the joint service, Diane Barrett. And it really is just to get people more information. And then at the May board meeting, in addition to having our board meeting in the morning, then we have lunch with the commission, and then we're doing a joint workshop with the Transportation Commission and the CTIO to basically, again, get a full presentation from the joint service, but also to really, talk about the nuts and bolts of these commitments that they're looking for. So like I said, I just wanted to just get that on everyone's radar and know that it's kind of coming pretty quickly. To the extent you got questions or concerns, please just let me know. We move on. So a few things I just wanted to talk about with respect to where we are in implementing the program. Again, I'm focused on the formula program. As all the board members know, we've been working hard on pulling together the formula. We now have a working tool and data that we've collected to do that. Legislature provided the 6 factors, the population. Well, I'll just kind of go through them. The population one was pretty clean. We feel pretty good about that. The ridership, the vehicle revenue miles, again, like all that's available in the National Transit Database. in places where we don't have that by agencies, I've been able to either contact the agencies directly to get the information, or in some places we did some just digging around like budgets and plans and things, but pretty much have a complete set of data for those elements. Population density has proved to be a little bit more challenging. It's just when you get into the complexity of trying to define both each agency's service area and the associated population, I found it got pretty messy. So rather than just using pure population density numbers, which again, I feel like my confidence level isn't that high with them, I've gone to a kind of a tiering approach where essentially we're looking at agencies over 4,000 people per square mile, they get 5 points. And if you're between 2 and 4,000, you get 4 points, and so on. The other thing is that what I've seen though is the density doesn't really change, that factor doesn't change the allocations that much. It tends to be go in the same direction as population and ridership. So we could spend a ton of energy and money trying to develop very specific information on each agency, but I don't think it would really move the meter at all. So I just wanted to let you know we've gone in that direction. Similarly, on the local zoning, I've broadened that out to planning. And this is going to be more of a subjective assessment where we just kind of look at how transit friendly is the jurisdiction's planning and zoning activities. And I imagine we get in the NOFA, all convene a panel, and we're going to just go ahead and rank agencies again on a 1 to 5 scale. For purposes of moving forward, we've just done our own sort of gut check, which I think will be reasonably close. And then lastly, the transit reliant communities, the legislation identified areas they wanted us to include in this. This is low income, disabilities, elderly, households or people with no automobile, and then people of color. And we did quite a bit of work. I said, been able to come up with an index for each transit agency. One question I have is the way we're doing it right now is we're just giving equal weighting to all 5 of those elements. And that works just fine. I just thought I'd do a gut check with the board. Does anyone think we should try and be more nuanced and give a higher or lower weight to any of these 5 elements in the transit reliant communities factor?
Anyone have some thoughts for Craig on that question?
I'm not recommending that we do. In fact, I sort of feel like, I think it would be a lot more analysis for not that much bang. It's not going to change, I think, outcomes that much. But if anyone has any strong opinions about that when they think about it, or when you're kind of looking into the model, just let me know. But for purposes going forward, I think we're just going to assume equal weighting then. Okay. All right, so a few things that have kind of come up as we've been working to develop the model. And again, the purpose of today's discussion is really just to address a bunch of points that I think I need to get to some final scenarios or runs so that we can really roll up our sleeves and try and make a decision on the formula at the next board meeting. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. So the first question is, we've talked about perhaps having a reserve fund and basically keeping some money back so that if we do get a downturn in oil and gas prices, and we see a big dip in funding, we could use that reserve to have greater continuity in our funding levels. I'm going to just make a recommendation and let the board react to it. I think given the funding level in FY26, with the reduced level because of the cap, that we not really hold anything back in 26. But starting in 27, we work to start building a reserve and perhaps do it over 3 years, where we look to hold back 5 or 6% a year for 3 years, targeting a 15 or 16% overall reserve. And then once we get to that reserve, we're basically then putting out the full amount available and maintaining that balance. So I'd like to just put that out to see if board members, A, feel like we should have a reserve, and 2, is a 15 or 16% target the right amount?
Any directors disagree with that approach? Sounds like you're getting some.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit. Director Jones, I think you had said that isn't there some maximum you're supposed 16% is the magic number or something? And each year when we, sorry?
At least in local government.
And again, we can make that decision on a year-by-year basis when we do the budget, but I think we just kind of consider that. But I need to build that into the modeling, so we're using the right estimates. Okay, second question is a cap. So I've talked to a lot of directors about this, but one of the things that I saw when I was doing the model is, with the factors that legislation provides, we were getting some outlier agencies that were getting really big increases, like 60, 70% increases in their operating budget. And it seemed very incongruous with most of the other agencies. Also, I feel like having an agency get that big of a bump creates some continuity concerns where if the next year our funding drops, suddenly they might be really upside down in their operations. And I don't know if it's really prudent to give that big of an increase all at once. So what I built into the model was this ability to cap the amount of funding that an agency would get. And right now it's based on their FY 2023 budget. And when I did that, it ended up kind of backing into a reality that's a pretty good assessment of what's fair. So, our agency's getting a fair amount of money compared to, their needs and how other agencies are doing. And generally, what I saw is most agencies will likely be in about a 10 or 20% increase from their 2023 budget. But what I'd like to do is to put that cap in place. And the number that I've been using is a 20% cap. So essentially said you'd run the formula, but if an agency was over 20%, then it would just stop there and be capped. So let me just see what the board members think about this. Do you like the idea of cap, and do you feel like 20% is a kind of a reasonable amount to hold people to for an increase?
Director Brecky?
Yeah, thank you. I think I like the idea of this, but I do think it's important to offer that ability to consider the waivers, because this is going to be different for different size agencies and different future considerations. So I think it's a good idea to have this cap, but to also allow for flexibility or change over time, especially I guess if you're basing it off of FY 23, because a lot has changed in local agencies since then. So anyway, I like the idea of the cap. I think you're going the right direction. I just think it's a good idea to allow waivers and flexibility if needed.
Thank you, Director Brecky. Director Frommer?
Yeah, excuse me. You just reminded me of some numbers we crunched and CDOT crunched like 4 or 5 years ago on like realistically how fast transit agencies can grow. And CDOT has this cost benefit analysis they did for the greenhouse gas rule back in 2021, where I think they said like the most aggressive growth rate would be like 6% a year in vehicle revenue miles or vehicle revenue hours, I forget which. But that would be basically faster than any annual increase in the last like 25, 30 years. It's pretty aggressive, right? You got to buy the buses and hire the operators and get them all driving. So like a much higher cap, I'm not sure how transit agencies would respond to that. I imagine there'd be like a lot of roll forward funds, and then they'd get the same amount next year, and it would kind of like snowball. So I don't quite know what the right number is, but just like putting those thoughts out there, thinking about like just the reasonable growth rate over time, so that the money's actually translating to more transit service.
I think the thought about either providing a waiver, or some way around it, we could do that. One thing I've thought about is it's a priority for the governor's office for agencies to create regional transit authorities. I could see a good justification that if a transit agency is part of an RTA, that they presumably have better ability to raise their funds themselves to address a sudden downturn in SB 230 funds. I don't think we have to decide that right now. But just said, I think we could easily like look at something like that down the road. The other thing that Director Brackey mentioned that, the agency budgets are changing, are going to be different every year and are presumably growing. One thing that we'll have to think about is we don't want to keep, if next year's basis for the cap is their operating budget that includes SB 230 money, then we're kind of in this like, ever increasing loop. So we may need to think about we will need to think about how we use what the basis for the cap is in future years. But I think for now, it's like a good thing to get us off of the first year, and then down the road, we kind of see how we want to handle it. Director Blinn?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this to you, Craig, but one thing that stood out to me in thinking about a cap is just for the smaller agencies, a cap on their operating budget might be so small that they couldn't afford like another vehicle to get to a next level of service. And that might be a reason for a waiver in my mind, if they had a plan to do that, just because some of them their budgets are pretty small. So that was just one thought.
Yeah, good point. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving here. We only got about 8 or 10 minutes left, if it's okay. This is a few things that I just want to kind of let people know is going on. As I think I guessed early on, that trying to have a formula that's where you're looking at the same factors for RTD that you are for smaller agency doesn't work very well. And so what I've broken the model into 3 categories. So there's RTD, which will probably largely be a negotiated amount. There's a pool of all the large agencies, and that's agencies with ridership over 30,000 per year, and then smaller agencies. And so, what I'm looking at, and one of the things we'll can talk about it next month, is just what do we allocate to these 3 different areas. But that also, I think, addresses some of the communities I've heard from Director Block and from some of the rural agencies is like they're not going to be able to compete against the RAFTAs or transports. So what the way it's set up now is that the small agencies are really kind of competing against each other, and that seems to work reasonably well. Again, going back and applying that sort of gut check of where are they in their percentage increase in their operating budget. Like we're in that sweet spot, I think, of a 10 to 20% increase. Let's see, as I said, we're putting out the NOFA in June. I plan to use that effort to also just allow agencies to validate their data. Like I feel pretty good about it, but I found errors in the NTD data. So I think it's being important that we do give agencies a chance to look at what we're using and make sure we've got the right numbers. I think I want to kick this one down the road right now, but at some point we got to think about not just how we're setting up the formula for this year, but what are we going to do down the road? So I think there's 2 options. We could each year, get as the new data becomes available in the National Transit Database, update that every year and see what the formula says. We could also use an approach I think CDOT has used in some other programs. I think in the 5311, which is to just basically set the share of the budget of the program that the agencies get for a year, for maybe 2 years. And then when we get to FY28, that perhaps we rerun the numbers then. But since we don't have that much time, let's maybe talk about that one in the next board meeting. But again, I think we got to just think about what's better. And I'm not sure I really have a recommendation. Human for large on-demand agencies. I think I'm going to kind of keep moving here just because we're short on time. There's a couple other questions I really wanted to get to, if you don't mind. So I feel like, I would like to see if I could get some more guidance on local match. We've talked about this in the past. I think everyone all the board members agree that a local match is a good idea, provided that we can provide some waivers or a sliding scale. So I guess the first question is, what's the right amount? 5311 program is a 50-50 match. I think we've heard that, with that program still going, agencies may really struggle at 50%, and that would, could create real barriers to participation. There's a lot of programs, the capital programs tend to be 80-20. I've thrown out the number of 25%, just figure it's somewhere in between. Would like to see if the board has a strong opinion, like is 25 fine? And I guess with that also, if we do 25% and then use, basically enable agencies to request a waiver or a reduced match. And I think I would just put together some, try and get a consistent policy about what agencies would need to show to be eligible for that waiver. Let me just see if I could get a quick gut check from the board as to whether 25% match sounds right.
See a thumbs up from Director Brackey. Any other folks want to indicate with thumbs or otherwise? Seeing mostly thumbs up. I don't know that there's a magic number.
Yeah.
So I think we'll just continue to learn more as we move forward, but it looks like there's general support for 25, but.
And I, what I was telling the folks on the town hall calls is, we're standing up a big program really quick. We're going to throw some stuff against the wall and see if it sticks. We're going to make sure we reserve the right to change just about anything and how we stand it up. So, I mean, maybe we do the first NOFA and see what happens. And if we find that number was problematic for a reason, we can change it next year. So I don't want anyone to feel like we're locking ourselves into some sort of precedent that we can't move away, change down the road. I'd like to talk a little bit about eligible costs and if we want to put any restrictions on it. And I can kind of combine these two bullet points. So, I've identified a bunch of areas where I think agencies would spend these money. So they could spend the SB 230 money. There's sort of I think the real target side of that is things that are really going to expand their operations by increasing routes, expanding current routes, reducing headway or increasing frequency to reduce headways. And I'm pretty sure we want as much money can go into that, the better. But then there are other things that are in there, like promotions and marketing, planning, back office capacity or administrative activities, or even sort of the spending on fixed route versus demand, on demand type of services. And I think that would be more for urban areas, not some of the rural on demand only. But do we want to put any restrictions on there? There is concern that, for the nexus of the enterprise, we want to be doing as much as we can to reduce greenhouse gases, which means getting services out there to grow ridership. I think all of these activities arguably are necessary to get there, but do we want to limit how much goes to them? And just said ideas are we could sort of say, look, you can't spend more than 20% of your grant on planning. Maybe not, rather than saying on 1 year, say over 5 years or some 4 or 5 years. We want you to keep it to 20% or below. We could sort of say you could do planning the first year, but after that, we want it's not eligible. We know that there's going to be some planning needs out there, but I guess is there any restrictions we want to put in place to try and really make sure that the money's going to what our priorities are? Let me just throw that open for discussion.
All right, everybody has 3 seconds for comments.
Yeah.
Director Brackey.
All right, I'll be quick. I agree that debt service should not be eligible, but I don't think we should limit the other categories at this time until we get more, have some more experience with it and see what people are bringing forward. So, but I'll leave time for others.
Any other comments? Anybody who disagrees with Director Brackey's? Director Frommer.
Yeah, I guess my question is how we would know whether an agency would choose to use existing dollars or that new SB 230 dollars for something like back office capacity, rather than just kind of shifting funds around, right?
Good question. I think, first of all, the way the money's going to be flowing is on a reimbursable basis. So it's not like we hand them the pile of money and, they use it however they want. They're going to have to spend the money themselves, provide the documentation for how they spend it. So you'll be able to see what the money's being spent on. So that's part of the concern. I think that we'll know what's getting spent on. As to the second part of your question about whether they're, doing a shell game or something like that, in part, I think, we're hopefully everyone's working in good faith. But I do think as part of the NOFA, we're going to ask for some financial information. And, particularly in later years, we'll be looking at, has there been good maintenance of effort in a sense of their funding? I think at a high level that should be very doable, but at some point, I don't think we're going to be doing forensic analysis on everyone's account to track those dollars. So we're going to have to find that sweet spot, be it between trying to provide some accountability and transparency of what agencies are doing it without creating a huge administrative burden on both staff and our customers. But it's a concern, and I also think we're just going to have to sort of see what it looks like to see if it's an issue or a problem, and if so, deal with it. If not, then we're fine. Okay, any other comments? Let's see what else in it. The last thing, and we can wrap up here because we're already over time, but a big thing that I wrote this before I saw the legislation where they changed the name to a comprehensive operations analysis, but that's going to be a very important part of the NOFA. I've actually developed a draft template. I've shared it with Colorado Springs and Durango, who have agreed to be sort of guinea pigs for doing that. And, we're fleshing out to see what's going to be available. So again, I think we'll have more time. We can discuss this in May, but I'll also have more information where I can maybe even show an example of what I think we might getting back from agencies, and the board could weigh in it. But given where we are on time, I'm just going to kind of wrap it up here, if I can. So we've got a short time frame to the next. It's only really 2 weeks till the next board meeting, which is going to put a lot of pressure on me. But we're going to be doing the first CT board meeting in person, so I'm looking forward to having the group together. We're doing that in conjunction with the Transportation Commission. So like I said, hopefully that'll be a good experience for everyone. If any board members need information about reimbursement or any other directions for any other information to accommodate getting into town, please let me know. The meeting is going to focus primarily on two things. One is trying to really get to hopefully a decision or something pretty close on the actual formula and eligibility policy. So again, I think be prepared to roll your sleeves up. And then so there's also this afternoon session that we're doing with the CTIO and the commission on the joint service. So with that, sorry, I got a couple minutes late here. Doing my best to try and keep us on time. Director Jones, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks so much for a lot of content today. Looking forward to seeing everyone in person, 3D, in a couple weeks. Thanks, everybody. With that, I will gladly adjourn our meeting.